KPCA, LP, Petaluma, California. Well, good afternoon, Petaluma. This is two Mooks and a mic. And to you faithful listeners, you can tell there's only one Mook's voice right now. Normally we have our co-host Jim Thomas with us, but Jim has been sent around the world on assignment and will be out there plumbing the depths of the rest of the world for several weeks. So today you have me, your host, Matt McGuire. Happy to have you listening. Thanks for tuning in, folks. And we also have a special guest today, our good friend Chris Fisher. Now, Chris is the progenitor, the genius behind the, I'm not sure what all you'd say, but the creator of the sort of erratically published blog, The Raucous Rooster. Would you say that's accurate, Chris?
Thanks.
Welcome.
Thanks, Matt.
Say hi.
Yeah, that sounds accurate to me. I'm going to adjust my microphone a little bit
go
here.
ahead.
Trying to make sure these things don't bite. I realize I helped build this radio station, but I'm still a little nervous about being on the air.
You did a good job.
Thank you. The Raucous Rooster, you described it pretty well. It's a little blog that I started about 7 years ago, actually. And it, I think it started off initially. I was just actually I did call it a blog. I don't think I've ever said that. I've sort of objected to it before.
Oh, what did you call it then? Just a missives from space, or
yeah, I think I just called it initially an online press.
Press.
I just wanted to highlight things that were missing in local coverage of local issues and other issues that didn't get enough attention. Sort of, like focusing on the sustainable food shed, and basically just anything that came to mind that appealed to my background, which is mass media,
right?
The corporate media versus alternative media challenge.
And like two Mooks, you actually cover everything from the local to the national to international.
I do, yeah, and that's
you've done some very erudite writing on that.
I have to thank you. I actually had to look that word up the other day when you mentioned that. I appreciate that. It's I tried to focus it and narrow it down a bit more. Originally, I think I was planning on doing something that was just focused on a sustainable food shed and be a food and ag focus. But that's really, that was a more recent background for me when I was in the restaurant business here in town with Cafe Zazzle.
That's right. You helped put Cafe Zazzle together.
Yeah, I did indeed.
That's right.
And I was there for the first couple of years of that. And after that, I was unemployed for a little while I looked for the next thing. And that's when the Rooster got started. Have all kinds of interesting plans for it that most of which I haven't really pushed too far, but just because I've been busy doing other things, including working here at PCA for about 4 years up until last summer.
Yeah. Well, I would say that, it's an interesting mix too, because you do things such as even you've got like cartoons. And let's see, and who's the artist?
Dwayne Booth, Mr. Fish.
Mr. Fish. Now that's funny because your name is Fisher, and he's Mr. Fish. But
I think that's why he lets me reproduce his stuff for free.
That's good of him. They are cogent political cartoons.
Mr. Fish. Actually, I had a couple people just this past week ask me about those cartoons too, and I love referring people to him because he has a way. The man has obviously studied some media in his past.
Yeah.
He does a few things about Noam Chomsky in his tunes here and there. He digs beneath and behind the headlines. He does really complex tunes that you actually have to think about if you can stop from the reacting to them. He does extremely provocative stuff.
He does, yeah. Well, that's interesting because it opens up, this is like your blog, you started out with food and sustainability. Of course, then you're talking about the environment, and then you're talking about environmental law and, project review. And so it kind of opens up everything. And you've kind of gone well on beyond just food topics. And you've dug really deeply into some things. I've seen you write about significant chapters in history that are maybe little known, but important in their context of what goes on today. Where do you get your information? What's your inspiration? Tell us how this comes to be, Chris.
Well, I think, when I was a kid, I probably was one of those people who would have been diagnosed with ADHD or something to that
Huh.
effect, simply because I don't really know the boundaries and I have to develop my own structure for everything. So that's why still Raucous Rooster is kind of all over the map a bit. But I always see connections between things, between issues that I have a hard time
Separating
articulating
or
and separating. So a lot of times, what I write about, like on the Rooster, one of the things that I posted about recently and plan on doing more about is Richard Nixon's bombing of Cambodia back in started in 1969.
a dark, dark chapter of American
Yeah,
history.
Operation Breakfast. Actually, it was
Was
just
that the name of it?
Operation Breakfast, and
It's
it ended up
disgusting.
being a whole operation menu that all had breakfast, lunch, and dinner within
Oh, really?
it. Yeah, they had some really interesting names for these things. Which Operation Breakfast, the initial one, I mean, it started off a series of bombings that lasted long after the U.S. troops were withdrawn, until the end of the war, and it actually ended up killing or displacing about 6 million people.
Wow. And that started out as a secret bombing program under Nixon.
Yeah, that actually was the interesting part of that. It was completely secret. Nixon had campaigned in '68 on getting us out of the war with an honorable end, or basically,
Liar.
Yeah, he did lie.
Yeah,
and
but then he always did.
Yeah, and the more we get from Nixon's the recordings and
release
H.R.
of
Haldeman's notes, for example,
right, like the release of the White House tapes and things that were embargoed for what?
Right.
How many years? How many decades?
Well, so the more this information comes out, we find out a lot more about how much Nixon lied. But back to your question about where I get all of this information, it's I cast, every day, I cast a huge wide net for headlines, and then I just end up narrowing down, what the subjects that are most of interest to me at the time. So of course you have to. I mean, since I'm a media person, I have to get headlines from the New York Times and the Guardian and Fox and probably Wall Street Journal and Financial Times. Maybe I'll glance at all those.
Oh yeah.
But I never miss Democracy Now, and I never miss KPFA headlines. So.
And do you listen to Project Censored?
I do. I don't listen to their show as much as I read their stuff online.
Yeah, in their books and stuff.
It's an interesting thing. Sometimes. Like the Guardian's a good example. New York Times, those for me, they're both online publications. It's not. Obviously, nobody gets. I don't think anybody gets a paper. Is there a print edition in the U.S. of the Guardian? I don't think there is.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. But I only see that online.
One thing I do actually is I totally avoid TV news. I haven't watched TV news since I was in college studying media because it requires too much unpacking for me. I have to, the past 2 years living with my mother-in-law, for example, who's a huge MSNBC fan. I've seen more MSNBC than I have in my lifetime previously, but I actually had to start developing some distance between myself and my mother-in-law when she's in the house watching this stuff, because I can't stop critiquing it, and she just wants to have a enjoyable time watching the news.
Yeah, as if one could these days.
You're right.
But I know what you mean. But then I gave up TV news, I think, around high school days because I could just see there was more lies through omission and through subtle twistings than truth and information delivered. And of course, nowadays everything is such soundbite oriented that it's a shameful excuse for the news. Really, it is, right?
Yeah.
And then of course you've got the White House propaganda station, Fox.
Right.
Fox lies.
Right. And we all have, I've got a set of parents who I would love to stop watching Fox News.
Yeah.
And I think there's actually was a movie. I was a movie a couple years ago about the gal did a movie about getting her dad off of Fox News.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was a good documentary apparently. Fox is its own set of things for sure.
Yeah,
I certainly don't go there. Rupert Murdoch talked about that in the 90s when he founded the Fox channel and when he started Fox News. He talked about it basically carrying out his political agenda, which is a pro-corporate Republican agenda.
Deregulation and
So from my perspective, I never understood why people would tune into that. But that news that Rupert Murdoch said that wasn't exactly news itself. It was not on the front page of the New York Times or the Washington Post.
Yeah.
So yeah, I avoid Fox News.
Well, I mean, we are exposed to it unwillingly in some cases, but other times it's good to examine some of that stuff. But certainly, they fabricate a complete unreal reality, truly the fake news. But it requires that you constantly keep watching.
Sure.
However, they're really good at manipulating people's fears and angers and keep their eyeballs on the screen that way.
So, right. And now, of course, we have to pay a little bit of attention to Fox because that's what President Trump watches. So
that's what dictates national and international policy.
Apparently that's the case.
Yes. Yeah. Chris, real quick, how do people, if they want to look at the Raucous Rooster, how do they get that? Do they send you their email, or how do you distribute it?
It's strictly an online publication. I publish it through WordPress, so there is a mailing list where if they go to the website theraucousrooster.com.
Spell raucous.
RAUCOUS.
Rooster.com.
And enter your email address there, then you'll get every post that comes out. The best way to read it, though,
you said it's the Raucous Rooster.
The Raucous Rooster, yeah, THE.
Okay.
The best way to read it, though, is really to go to the website and check it out online rather than getting it in your inbox, because it looks a lot better. But honestly, it's well, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, so go to the website theraucousrooster.com. Okay, so all right, so you've done things. You've done political cartoons. You've done Vietnamese history. You've certainly talked about the Trump administration, and you're doing this by collecting information through a wide variety of sources. Yeah. So, and does it take, but how often are you actually putting together a missive, a blog, or, is it once a month or 3 times a week? Is it completely erratic?
Well, at this stage, it is.
Is it ADHD?
I hate to say that it is a little more erratic right now, as we're talking about it, than normal, because I'm underemployed and I'm juggling about 3 or 4 different part-time jobs right now.
I see. So you got to make a living, yeah.
Yeah. So the fun stuff that I do with the Raucous Rooster is a little bit few and far between. I think the last 2 things I posted might have been Mr. Fish cartoons, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
So I'm sorry. What was
well,
that?
just so how often does it happen? But under the constraints of reality.
Yeah, it is. Actually, sometimes I post things that other people contribute to the Rooster. That's a possibility too. Sometimes people get, like Don Lewis, the head of PCA here.
Yeah, our
he
new
submitted.
ED.
He submitted something during the last election that was really cool, just talking about who received what money from whom on the local level. So
very important.
Yeah. So sometimes it's good just to have an outlet online to post things. So
Sure.
Actually this weekend I'm planning on sharing a whole bunch of stuff about local events coming up, because it's stuff that I get excited about, that I want to make sure that other people see. Petaluma Bounty's plant sales coming up at the end of the month, and since I'm all about sustainable food and ag, I want to make sure people know about that kind of stuff too.
Mentor Me's tomato sale is tomorrow. We'll talk about that at the end.
Obviously, I'm going to be growing a lot more tomatoes this year than I want. That's always the case with these sales. Yeah.
Better too many tomatoes than too few, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you've got this. So you've got a sort of a background in politics from your education and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that. Your interests, are about politics, right? So, what did you pursue in college?
Well, I've actually always been interested in politics, and I was one of those really patriotic kids. In 1976, I remember the bicentennial. Yeah. I was so angry that I couldn't go to D.C. for the celebration. Plus, you
were just a little kid then.
Well, I was, but I did walk door to door for J. Rockefeller for governor in 1976. No, yeah, that was my first experience campaigning at all. I'm a little embarrassed about it now, but I can't take much credit or responsibility for J. Rockefeller, I don't think. But I was always interested in politics, and I was a patriotic kid. So we got, I think it was really when I was a senior in high school down in Redwood, Larkspur. We moved to California when I was 13 from West Virginia.
Marin County. It was a change for you.
It was a huge change, and it took me quite a few years to recover, actually.
Yeah.
But Larkspur was awesome. The senior year, Chip Ray at Redwood High School, he said something. I think we were just talking about the budget. And that was when Ronald Reagan was proposing to balance the budget in his second term. But Chip Ray, this great teacher, he asked this question like, well, how do you balance the budget when you've increased defense spending by X percentage and lowered tax revenues by X amount?
Yeah, good
And
question.
yeah, it was such a good question. And David Stockman, the budget director for Reagan around that time, gave an interview to William Greider with the Atlantic magazine at that point. And David Stockman said, well, we don't know what these numbers all mean. We just kind of made them up.
And the Republicans have been making them up ever since.
And they still are.
The lie.
Yeah, it's amazing how now we can run a $12 trillion national debt, and it's like, who cares? But back in the 80s, when I got excited about politics, it was trillions was a big deal. And at that point, Ronald Reagan ran up more national debt in his 2 terms than every previous president combined.
Well, and in fact, under the Republican administrations, the debt has gone up, and the economies have been strained, to say the least. Of course, George W. Bush left us with just a complete catastrophic wreck of an economy.
2 wars on a credit card.
Exactly. 2 illegal wars on that. Yeah. Well, Chris, you're a political guy. There's lots going on these days. Of course, the big news right now is that Julian Assange was hauled out of the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he'd been for the last 7 years. Now, Julian Assange, of course, became famous when he assisted Chelsea Manning in distributing information and tapes, videos of basically what amount to war crimes in Iraq. There was a video, I think we all remember it, very horrifying, of a helicopter gunship, murdering.
It was called the collateral murder video.
Yeah, 18. I think it was 18 people on the street was it in Baghdad or something?
I believe it was, including a Reuters journalist.
A Reuters journalist, yeah, and they had just come from lunch and they're walking along talking and just get wiped out. I mean, and this is the kind of thing that was going on. And that's the kind of thing that journalism is supposed to do. It's supposed to expose crimes by governments, amongst other things, of course. And that just made the establishment here, the military-industrial establishment, furious and hateful towards Chelsea Manning, who then was convicted of 35 years in prison. Obama did. She served about 7, and Obama did commute the remainder, but she is still in jail for not testifying in front of a grand jury, where they're trying to, force her into more, more confessions that she's not going to make.
Refresh my memory. That she's in jail now for not answering questions about from the Assange case. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah,
this is related.
I believe you're right. Yeah, and because she did also send WikiLeaks, which is the information distribution website that Julian Assange created, information on diplomatic cables and stuff, which were not so much more damaging. However, Julian Assange, has infuriated a lot of people on the left when he contributed to the election of Donald Trump, many of us think, by taking the emails from the Democratic National Committee and John Podesta that were hacked by the Russians and provided to WikiLeaks, and timed it to do the most damage right before the election there, where Trump was putatively elected. So it's interesting because Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept, who's a tremendous free speech advocate and does really good reporting and flies in the face of the powers that be, and was very much involved in the Edward Snowden release of information, that he's saying this is a tremendous risk to honest journalism. He does mention that Julian Assange can be his own worst enemy. Mm-hmm. And when Assange did that to the Hillary campaign, that did indicate such a thing. And apparently it's not very easy to get along with in close quarters either.
That doesn't surprise me, I think. Yeah.
He's got a cat. He can't be all bad.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, this is huge, right? Because he's been there for 7 years, and he originally was given asylum by the previous Ecuadorian president, Rafael Correa. Now, Moreno, the current president, has been being pressured by the U.S. Vice President Pence was just down there and offering loans and incentives, which apparently Ecuador has taken advantage of some of those loans. With the intent of trying to, pop Assange out of there. This is also apparently Mike Pompeo and John Bolton's more fascist desires to get their hands on somebody and get their revenge. So what do you think?
Well, I just happened to, of course, this was on my mind this morning, because it was all day yesterday. I think I was reading this. I was supposed to be working, actually. But this morning, the USA Today, Jonathan Turley, published an article that said WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange will be punished for embarrassing the DC establishment. That's what caught my attention, because I understand why a lot of Democrats as well as Republicans would be upset with Julian Assange. Yeah. And not just that, but honestly with Glenn Greenwald. I mean, there's a lot of residual anger with the press in general over the election. And some of that, honestly, you have to target at the alternative press for doing such a darn good job about publicizing really horrifically negative stuff about candidates. But this Jonathan Turley's piece in USA Today, it starts off by quoting Joe Manchin, the senator from my home state of West Virginia, saying about Julian Assange,
a conservative Democrat.
Yes, a very conservative Democrat. He is our property, Joe says. Ooh. Now, Joe is a troglodyte from a whole nother era, for sure. But that's the way that they feel about Julian Assange, and honestly, Chelsea Manning. They have a strong desire to punish these folks and
make examples out of them.
Yeah. So I mean, as a media person now, I'm kind of interested in how Democrats respond to this, and for example, how the Republicans who have declared the Democrats who have declared for president,
how they respond.
I'll be really curious to see, because
as Glenn Greenwald pointed out, they want to go after Assange for publishing information that both the New York Times and the Washington Post and many other mainstream media organizations distributed as well. Right. Now, it turns out that, what originally people thought that they were going to be trying to charge him under the Espionage Act, a World War I law that unfortunately Obama started using more against whistleblowers. But it turns out that they are not yet charging him under the Espionage Act that would, make publishing state secrets a crime. But they are after him. The charge is that he collaborated or colluded with Chelsea Manning to try to hack some encrypted information that Manning had access to. And this is where they're saying, and some journalists are reporting, they're saying, this is where you just, stepped over the line for journalism. It's one thing to publish state secrets. It's one thing to protect your sources. Mm-hmm. It's another thing to collaborate in trying to break into a computer or something. Now, it sounds like a pretty thin charge to me. It's going to be interesting to see what real document they have. There's like one quote of Julian Assange saying, no luck so far. Well, that's completely, if that's your case there, forget it, government prosecutors, but that's not going to stop them from trying to prosecute.
It seems like a pretty shrewd move, honestly, for the prosecutors to do that, because, and you can tell from the response so far. Michelle Goldberg, the columnist for the New York Times, her column today was basically, well, Julian Assange has it coming. Uh-huh. And she's talking about the narrowness of that charge, and this isn't a First Amendment thing. This is,
a Bloomberg editor had the same op-ed today as well. Yeah.
So I mean, this is.
If it's a pretext, if it's a fig leaf, and they're going after him, and really, I mean, clearly, I think you and I are clear that this is power politics and revenge at play. In the public eye.
If you don't mess with Uncle Sam like this.
Exactly.
Just don't do it, yeah.
Except that you do when you're Jeff Sessions or Ryan Zinke, except for all the swamp dwellers.
James Clapper lying to Congress about. I mean, it's
to their faces.
There's a lack of accountability for a whole lot of upper management. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's the deep state that those of us realize is the true deep state, not the one that Donald Trump refers to. Of which he is a part of the deep state, and his little minions are too. So it's one of the things I found ironic was that as he was being hauled out of the embassy, was that he was yelling something about resisting Trump.
I don't know if you noticed, but he was also holding a book with Gore Vidal on the cover. It's a collection of Gore Vidal stuff about the national security state. So,
he's a real mixed bag, Assange. I don't care for him personally after the last election, but certainly think that there is a lot of wrong being perpetrated by the U.S. government in trying to keep this guy, And in fact, one of the things that a London judge quickly said he was guilty of violating his bail. Yeah, thank you. Now, that's not a very significant crime, and the bail was actually based on the charges that he had raped a woman in Sweden, I guess. But Sweden has dropped all those charges.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's like, okay, those charges are dropped, but you had, you jumped bail, and so that's a kind of a gray area, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, U.S. reporters routinely publish classified information both from the U.S. and foreign governments. And keep in mind, folks, that Julian Assange is an Australian citizen. So here, an Australian citizen is in the Ecuadorian embassy. They boot him out. The London police arrest him. And the President Morales of Ecuador said, well, we're not going to, we got an agreement from the British government that they would not deport him to any country where he would be tortured or subject to the death penalty. Well, guess what? We have the death penalty here. And you watch. What's going to happen is the U.S. government is going to make a deal with the British government and say, we promise that we'll pursue him to the ends of the earth, but we'll never, punish him with the death penalty.
We also, the last time we didn't, I'm using air quotes here, didn't practice torture. We did it by redefining torture. So,
yeah, that's true.
So, and also, on that subject, Chelsea Manning was in solitary confinement for a lot of those years that she spent in jail.
Yeah.
And according to international law, I forget what the length of term of solitary confinement is, but above a certain point, it becomes torture.
Yeah,
obviously.
Mental disintegration occurs and things. And yeah, that's right. And she was held in incommunicado, and I'm sure that
that's why a lot of people really thought Obama would have pardoned her or something long before he did, grant her clemency.
Yeah, and instead of just commute the remainder of her.
Right.
Yeah. So now some are saying that this violates international law regarding asylum. Now, I'm not an international law expert, but this is one of his attorneys was saying it violates international law regarding asylum and Ecuador's constitution. So that's going to be interesting. So, can you give somebody asylum and just take it away because they're not cleaning the bathroom, which is one of the charges, that one of the rationales, not a charge, but they're saying, I guess Assange, he skateboards in the hallway.
He was a poor roomie.
Yeah, that he didn't clean the bathroom. He didn't clean up after his cat. It's like, come on, folks. The guy's living in one room. It's like, wow. Come on. It just becomes absurd.
I don't know, but every picture I've seen of Julian Assange does look like he really needed to get outside and get some sun.
Yeah.
He's been locked up for
well, and his attorneys say that his health has been severely compromised.
I've heard that.
And maybe now he'll get some health care at least. So, yeah. It was, it's quite an interesting and dirty chapter. Another one, excuse me, in American political history. So we're going to keep an eye on that one, folks. Right? Okay. So, also in the news, all kinds of stuff about immigrants, right? So you see a purging of the leadership in Homeland Security. Apparently Kirsten Nielsen wasn't mean and nasty enough, even though she is the one that implemented the stealing children from their parents at the border.
Who was the mastermind of this?
So who do you think?
Stephen
Miller.
Thank you. I've lost his name for a second.
Yeah, like you.
It's Mr. Miller's 33 years old. Is that right?
Something like that. And man, he is just a vicious SOB
if
there ever was one. Yeah. There's going to be worse to come here, Chris. Most of the Miller and the right-wing faction in the White House are in control, and they're doing things like pushing this binary quote-unquote choice quote-unquote for immigrants that show up at the border with their kids. Now, just a reminder, these are people who are not committing crimes. It's legal to come to America and seek asylum. And they're saying, well, they'll have a binary choice. They can either choose to stay in prison with their children, or they can agree to have their children released to other guardians. Now, in some cases, if there's a family member in the country already, that may not be so bad. But of course, in the meantime, like 106,000 people came to the border in the last month. There is truly a surge.
Did you say the last month?
Last month in March. And there is a surge. And the irony, of course, is that, Donald Trump's deterrences, ripping kids away from their families and, locking them up under freeway bridges overnight and things like that have backfired. And people are going, well, maybe he is going to close the border. I guess I'll go now before it's closed or something.
And we're still not really discussing the political and economic factors that lead people to migrate northward.
To come here. In the meantime, of course, so another irony, Kirsten Nielsen and somebody else were just down in Central America talking about what can be done there to help ameliorate the forces that drive people out of those countries, right? Not to, beat this too much, but I always remind our listeners that things are so bad in Central America because of Ronald Reagan and Ollie North's support of the Contras and the efforts to suppress natural revolutions that were seeking justice for the people in Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And they've basically destroyed their societies, and that's why people are coming here.
Those were many of the issues that got me interested in politics too at the time back in the 80s. Because Ronald Reagan viewed everything through that anti-communist lens.
Yeah.
And those folks were not communists. Well, actually, some of them were. Some of them were Marxists. Like in El Salvador.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they were communists. And honestly, few people at the time could have described to you what a communist in Central America looked like. I mean, basically, they were nationalists.
Yeah, they were people that were struggling. They were in their own fight for their own freedom. Right. Yeah. And, so maybe if they did get some support from the Soviet Union at the time, not Russia, but Soviet Union, of course, you're going to take help from wherever you can. But of course, we went through the whole Iran-Contra, crimes, basically weapons for money
hey, and actually just to interject one thing there, we have Elliot Abrams back in helping out with Venezuela policy right now, and he was the one who helped manufacture that story about MiG-27s being sold to Nicaragua. Completely manufactured story.
A lie that justified Reagan. And at the time, Congress said to Reagan, no, you can't support the Contra. So they went around behind Congress back. And
that was the Boland Amendment, right?
Yeah, the Boland Amendment, and sold weapons to Iran. Right,
which is something I heard we weren't supposed to do. I think.
Yeah, completely.
They're bad guys.
So I mean, just the sleaze just is manifest. And then Trump was just down in Calexico looking at the border to, I don't know, while he was there, this is one of the things that I find really disgusting. He was telling Border Patrol agents just to not let the migrants in. He's going, tell them we don't have the capacity. And if judges give you trouble, say, sorry, judge, I can't do it. We don't have the room. And it's like the guy's inciting Border Patrol agents to break the law, right? And then when he leaves, they're going, well, wait, that's the president telling. So they go to their bosses and like, is he serious? And they're going, no, you can't do that. That's a violation of the laws, and we're supposed to be upholding the laws. So there's, some people in there that, still believe in some form of law, even though I'm not sure I can respect people that put on the Border Patrol uniform or the ICE uniforms, right? So, and Trump then said later on, no, to be honest with you, we have to get rid of judges. And it's like, what?
Wow.
Yeah. When he's
actually, I'd missed that. I'm still discovering things that he said. I think that I hear all the Trump news, but there's so much.
Yeah, there is.
What did he say?
He said, to be honest with you, we have to get rid of judges, right? And that was last week, Basically, what he's doing there is violating his oath to uphold the laws of the land. And you would think, okay, let's impeach the guy, right? That's impeachable. I think that's impeachable. Yeah. And then there were 3 House Democrats, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, not a person I love because of her part in, screwing over Bernie Sanders' campaign in the primary in 2016, but a Democrat, and Debbie Mukersel-Powell and Donna Shalala, who used to be head of the Democratic National Committee.
Yeah, and wasn't she? She was on the the cabinet as well.
Yes, that's right. She was a cabinet member. So they went to look at a Health and Human Services immigrant prison camp and were refused entry. And remember that happened like about a year or so ago?
Yeah, I did.
Congress passed a law and Trump signed it saying that Congress members specifically have the right to inspect these facilities. They were turned away at the camp. Oh, well, we need 2 weeks notice, they claimed, right? And I watched the video of that and I thought, good for you for going there and bad for you for not saying, let us in or we're calling the cops and going to have you arrested, officer, if you don't comply with the law.
Yeah, isn't that the point at which Donna Shalala can call the local sheriff and say, "Hey, I'm
I'm a congressperson. Here's the law, and this person is obstructing the law. I need you to arrest them." Yeah, but no, it's like this is are we surprised that Debbie Wasserman Schultz, one of the classic Democratic leadership members, is basically doesn't have the integrity or the spine to follow through on something like that? It's disappointing, but it's not surprising. Yeah. So that's a prison that has a capacity of like 3,200 people. So it needs to have oversight, right? Yeah. So let's see. Also on that topic, there's, Trump may nominate Julie Kirshner to be the head of U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services. Do you know who she is?
No, you'll have to tell me.
She's the ex-executive director of the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Now, the Southern Poverty Law Center says they are a hate group. They're an immigrant hate group.
All immigrants?
Yeah. They're
just opposed to Latin immigrants.
Well, I think they don't like Muslims either. They're an anti-immigrant hate group that was labeled as such in 2008. They were founded by a white nationalist, and Kirshner was the executive director there from 2007 to 2015, during which they lobbied for anti-immigrant laws and, wrote racist articles basically in their newsletter. So really, she quit to join Trump's campaign as his immigration advisor.
Wow.
This is like Stephen Miller's dream
That
babe.
probably does give you some insight into her perspective.
You think?
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be. So more of Stephen Miller's ugliness and nastiness. As the numbers rise, it is a crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis, but it's a crisis that Trump has created, and this is one of his typical MOs that, he creates a crisis and then tries to address it. The bad joke is that he fumbles and fails at addressing the crises he creates, right?
Yeah, well, he did warn us. He's the chaos president, didn't he?
Well, that's true. Yeah. In the meantime, he's not providing financial or other resources to help ease the overcrowding and the suffering because there's, let's see, what is it? There's something like, I think there's, I was looking at the numbers. Okay, so, there's certainly overcrowding and suffering, and they expect 27,000 kids to arrive here in April at the border. But he's doing nothing to speed up the immigration courts, and only 20% who apply for asylum ultimately win their cases.
Wow.
Now, 75% of the people who come and say, I want to apply for asylum, initially get the okay to go on. But of that number, only 20% ever actually end up staying. Now, about 15% don't show up to their hearings, which is that number is growing. Used to be like 5%, but in 2017 that was like 11,292 people. So you're not talking huge numbers there, but it's just a sad and tragic thing, right? And then another thing, a judge recently ruled that Trump's plan to make asylum seekers stay in Mexico, no, thumbs down, not legal.
No good on that one either.
No good on that one. Yeah. So what do you think of that, Chris?
Well, it seems to me like he just makes stuff up as he goes along.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, what are you thinking? Well, or he's just, it's like, how mean can I be? What other mean thing can I do? Well,
in terms of like proactive, progressive, as in making progress, let's not call it progressive, but let's say if we're going to make progress with policy, it's kind of hard for Trump to describe much. So, I guess this is their effort at creating some kind of policy that they're going to try and spin as, this is just going to their base. Appealing to...
If he's so inept at, thinking ahead or, thinking on his own, so he turns to Fox and he turns to Stephen Miller.
Right.
Talk about, the lowest common denominator. That's really frightening, right? Disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're still appalled. I'm sure a lot of us that people do watch Fox, but
Yeah.
that it's Donald Trump watching Fox and actually using that information to take action is
And
in the White House. That's still.
And they echo each other back and forth, and it just can only go downhill, right?
I wonder how far ahead of time is it Fox and Friends that's his favorite?
I think so.
I wonder how far ahead of time they plan their shows and how much effort they go into.
Well, so is it Hannity that's on the phone to him like every day?
I think so, but I'm.
Yeah, so they're all. I mean, talk about.
I hate to even mention his name.
Collusion. Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, and so like Trump, I mean, everywhere you turn, it's more destruction. So he signed 2 executive orders to make it harder for states to stop oil and gas pipelines. I'm all for states' rights, except for now that, states like New York and, stopped a pipeline. And it's like, well, we got to stop that. So Washington State and New York have both stopped pipelines through their permitting processes. And so he's like, too often badly needed energy infrastructure is being held back by special interest groups, the public, entrenched bureaucracies, and radical activists. It's like, well, talk about radical. I mean, the world is, on fire, and you're like, pump and burn more gas.
Burn more gas. Yeah, there's just, it is startling for sure, but that goes all the way down to the local level. I mean, we're still able to build new gas stations here in Petaluma.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I'm a little surprised that it's given the power of the fossil fuel industry, it shouldn't come as a surprise to me that we're still building fossil fuel infrastructure.
Yeah,
but I mean, it's an unparalleled amount of money they make, and
the subsidies they get,
that's in the hundreds
severance allowances and things for pumping and hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars.
I think
right?
It's billions. Honestly.
I think you're probably right. I mean, and certainly it is if you add it up over all the the decades and decades that they've been getting these benefits.
But if it's interesting, if you look down at the local level, and because I'm still reading the conversations like on Nextdoor.com, for example, about the Safeway gas station.
Yeah,
and it's there are a lot of people who just want that cheaper gas.
Yeah.
The fact that it's only cheaper gas if you spend X amount of dollars on groceries at Safeway, and the fact that honestly any more investment in fossil fuel infrastructure of any kind is literally going in the wrong direction.
Right.
If we want to halt and
we want to survive,
mitigate. Yeah. I mean, it is the survival at stake here, but a lot of people are still anxious to get their cheap gas.
Well, are you hearing anything on Nextdoor about people wanting to do a referendum, possibly?
I haven't. In fact, it's an interesting thing. So far, Nextdoor, I've only been on there for a couple of years, but as a social media outlet, it's a little bit more on the right-wing side in Petaluma than the actual population, I think. But Petaluma's population is wildly diverse.
It is.
I mean, from left to right.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just maybe it's a better reflection of Petaluma than other social media outlets. It seems a little bit more right wing, or maybe that's just the discussion on this particular issue. I'm not quite clear on that yet.
Well, I remember similar discussions, regarding Target. It's like we need a cheaper place to shop, right?
Right.
And is this by design? I mean, are people their backs so pressed against the wall by the corporate, managing structure in this country that that they want it to be people so desperate that they'll allow just a slightly cheaper competitor to come in, no matter how destructive and corrosive that is to the community.
Right. I actually remember some of those arguments against Target and stuff, and because people were basically arguing that I have to drive all the way to Walmart to spend money.
Yeah, in Rohnert Park. Yeah. Instead of realizing that when you spend $1 at a local store, it circulates 6 or 8 times in the community versus, well. That's the world we live in.
It is indeed. It's complex, but I do like it. And I enjoy having these conversations about it too. And that's one of the things I enjoy about Petaluma is that
you can have these conversations.
Yeah, and it is that diversity. I mean, coming from, I came up here from Marin, and when I left Marin, I just felt like I was surrounded by very nice but very demanding upper middle class white folks who are, I'm a lower middle class white folk, but
our blue collar roots are.
This is blue collar, and it's Petaluma has so much going for it,
Yeah.
and the people are actually a big selling point.
Well, and then, like the city council had its goal setting session last weekend, and over 100 people showed and stayed through the day, right?
Right.
And I think it's a good sign that the council invited people in. Those are difficult events to extract a lot of distinct results out of, but over time, I mean, it's good that they had the input, and I heard that there was a lot.
Everybody
of good
had
input.
really good things to say about it. The one comment I saw from North Bay Organizing Project, they took, I think, 3 or 4 photos of all the bullet points that everybody had written out and listed up on. The one thing that was not anywhere on those 3 pictures they showed was anything about renters, helping renters in any way.
Yeah, that's a shame.
So I'm not, that was just I'm not going to criticize the event at all because I wasn't there, but everybody said really good things about it. But that didn't get brought up or didn't get noted. Let's put it that way. So.
That is a shame. I was just reading an article about in Berlin, housing advocates are actually demonstrating by the tens of thousands in the street, because Berlin, when the Berlin Wall went down and and West Berlin were reunited, there was a massive amount of very affordable housing run down in East Berlin, but very affordable. And so artists and bohemians and people that just wanted to live affordably flocked there, and now it's all getting gentrified. And so now there are corporations, that own like 3,000, units and stuff. And they're saying, these housing advocates are saying, our government, need to buy and force those units out of the hands of corporations and hold them and maintain them as affordable housing, affordable in the sense of the prices being controlled, not necessarily low income housing. But and so I thought, radical, but good for you guys. And, maybe we need a little taste of that around here, because I have not gotten, when I did interviews with the council candidates, I didn't get the traction I'd hoped to get for renter protections. I mean, God knows we need them here. We're desperate. And it just seems like, even our current, more progressive city council, there is still a fear of being labeled, you're going to stymie, the building of new units, right? It's like as if the current conditions foster it.
Yeah, just saying the words rent control, it raises lots of red flags for a lot of people. And I don't mean by no means do I mean right-wing people. I just mean a lot of people, you say rent control and it raises red flags. But if you unpack it and look at things like just cause for eviction controls only, things like that. I mean, there's certainly things that we could do that I think would be far less controversial than just saying we got to do rent control now. And,
but freeze all rents. It's like, I'm a landlord. I know, I know what works and doesn't work. But certainly there are things that renters need in the way of protections here. So, that's something we keep banging on here. Well, Chris, just on other stuff, Britain, the United Kingdom, has let itself in for 6 more months of tail chasing and paralysis and lunacy on Brexit. It's kind of fun to see another government be dysfunctional, aside from our own. Although I wish they would just get past that and figure out that it's okay to stay in or let the people vote again. And
we mentioned this before the show, but I must admit I'm enjoying watching or reading some of the Brexit stuff. I'm a little, I find it very confusing, but I do find it somewhat entertaining, and that's because it seems just as crazy as what we've been going through over here with Trump. So
it's like you think they could get together and make some compromises and stuff, but it's really that Northern Ireland border issue that's kind of stuck in everybody's craw.
Still there.
Still there. It's like, unify Ireland and be done with it, Oh, no, that ain't happening. Hey, I don't know. Did you hear about the 3 black churches that were burnt down within 10 days in a southern Louisiana parish this past month?
No.
Well,
tell me about that.
They, people are going, oh, no, this is like looking like the civil rights movement where churches were threatened and stuff. They arrested a suspect. The suspect is like a 21 or 23-year-old man. He's the son of a parish sheriff's deputy.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but hopefully they got the guy.
I'm sorry, you said Louisiana?
Yeah. Let's hope that's done with, right? Because that's pretty vicious to be burning down churches, right? Some good news. We always like to throw that in there. The Kansas state prosecutors dropped the last of Chris Kobach's voter fraud cases that he brought about when he was their Secretary of State. they dropped those cases based on lack of evidence.
Now, didn't Greg Palast say that Chris Kobach was the king of the GOP's voter suppression efforts or something to that effect?
And he was, because he put together these quote unquote cross-check lists that said, John Brown in Kansas, there's a John Brown in Texas, and they both voted in the same election cycle, and it's like, John Brown must be cheating. It's like different middle name and, different social security. They used it as a pretext to basically strip, hundreds of thousands of, Black, Hispanic, and Asian voters primarily off of the voter rolls and, have an impact on the elections, which they succeeded at to some degree. And then, of course, you recall that Kobach was President Trump's part of his voter fraud committee he put together. And, of course, that
died pretty quick, didn't it?
Pretty quick, because they just
they couldn't find any, or
it stunk too much. Okay. I think everybody said, "Oh, you stink."
Everybody couldn't stop laughing over the fact that they named him to this.
But they found 13 people, mostly old, confused Republicans, who was like, "Oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to vote in all those elections." They, a couple of them got fined for actually, voting more than once, he had promised to reveal the thousands of people committing fraud. And this was just the fig leaf that the right-wing Republicans used to try to disenfranchise, voters. So.
Well, I think we have another election coming up, so that's sure to continue. It's working for them. So
yes, it's true. The New Zealand banned most of its semi-automatic guns. In Parliament vote was 119-1.
To one. I wanted to ask you who was the one, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't find that out, but I was curious as well. But
I just wondering if it was an ideological thing, or if it was,
or maybe somebody thought it wasn't strong enough, because they are still allowing like some 22 caliber semi-automatic rifles with less than 10 rounds to be kept. But now it's going to be, you can't own them. You can't own any military style or assault rifles. And if you get caught with it, it's a 5-year prison sentence.
Wow. So
good for New Zealand, right? And that was just like a month after the slaughter that took place there. And then how about Amazon? We like to beat up on Bezos, and although we appreciate the fact that, he's, allowed the Washington Post to function in in a world that is not friendly to print media. So Bezos, this is interesting. Bezos challenges, he put out a tweet or a memo or something. He challenges his competition. He says, "You know who you are," referring to like Walmart and Target. He says, he's challenging them to pay their workers $15 an hour because he's committed to doing that. Well, good for you, Jeff. But Walmart turned around and said, "Yeah, well, we challenge you to pay some income taxes because you made $11.2 billion last year in profit and paid zero in income taxes, whereas Walmart paid $4.28 billion in income taxes." So
wow.
So it's like, but this is the kind of competition you like. I like seeing these guys point their fingers at each other like this. Mm-hmm. Maybe they will pay their income taxes and raise the income for their underpaid workers, right? Mm-hmm. Now, some of their workers at Amazon, though, the higher paid workers, 3,500 of them signed a letter calling on Bezos and the company to address global warming.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you say this was management? No,
yeah, well, higher paid.
Okay.
Yeah, not management per se, but not the warehouse workers typically. Mm-hmm. And they use their real names, which is unusual when you see these kinds of things happening by employees, because
that could be perilous.
Yeah, they run the risk of retaliation, right? But they said they want the firm to commit to reducing its carbon footprint across its vast network. And this is the part I like. They want them to stop offering custom cloud computing software services to help the fossil fuel industry to develop, more places to drill. How about that?
Wow.
Yeah. So, find and extract more fossil fuels. It's like, okay, you guys are right on. And, so we'll see if Amazon comes up with a carbon reduction plan here in the next few years. Speaking of which, the Bank of America is going to raise its minimum wage to $20 an hour by 2021. That's $41,000 a year. Isn't that great?
That's awesome.
What do you think the CEO makes?
I'd add some more zeros to that for sure. 20 million?
26.5. Maybe he should just like share some of that, right? And then J.P. Morgan Chase is going to up their wages to between $15 and $18 for 22,000 employees. Wells Fargo is going to up it to 15. The Pikers, right? But Jamie Dimon, the head of J.P. Morgan Chase, he got $31 million. So it's like you guys can afford even more than that.
Wow.
And then let's see, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association suit to try to stop the increase on bridge tolls was shot down. The court said, no, it's a fee, and the voters approved it. Go away now. So.
Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, they always claim to be acting in the public interest, but it's really just just anti-tax across the board?
Pretty much, yeah. Anti-government regulation. Yeah. And then a couple quick more announcements. Here's one that I have to say. We had reported on Motel 6 in the past in Washington State, giving their guest list to ICE, who would then target people with Hispanic names and detain them. And some people got arrested and deported. Well, that's a violation of their own terms and people's privacy. They had to pay up $12 million, mostly to their guests that were subjected to this. They did it for 2.5 years, and over 800,000 names were given to ICE in that process. Wow. Yeah. So, Chris, we're getting close to the end here. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to read you something. This is from Michael Parenti.
Okay.
And this is just about bias in media.
Okay.
And this is one of those things that inspired me when I was in college. Because I started college thinking, my news sources were TV and probably the Chronicle, like everybody else that grew up in the Bay Area. Yeah. This is from Democracy for the Few by Michael Parenti. There is no such thing as unbiased news. All reports and analyses are selective and inferential to some inescapable degree. All the more reason to provide a wider ideological spectrum of opinions and not let one bias predominate. If, in fact, we do consider censorship to be a loathsome danger to our freedom, then we should not overlook the fact that the media are already heavily censored by those who own and control them. The very process of selection allows the cultural and political biases and class interests of the selector to operate as a censor. Some measure of ideological heterodoxy could be achieved if public law required all newspapers and broadcasting stations to allot substantial portions of space and time to a diverse array of political opinion, including the most progressive and revolutionary. But given the interests that the law serves, this is not a likely development. That was 1986.
Yeah, see, that would be great if that, and that reminds us of the fairness doctrine.
Fairness doctrine, which doesn't exist anymore. Yeah.
Shot that down. Well, Chris, thanks for being our guest on Two Mooks and a Mic.
My pleasure.
Do want to say real quick, tomorrow is the Mentor Me annual tomato plant sale from 9 to 5 at the Kavanaugh Center on 8th Street. Go check it out. Get your veggies, folks. This has been Two Mooks and a Mic. We've had Chris Fisher on with us. Thanks. We'll be back next week. Jim will still be on assignment, but we will have Jane Hamilton as our guest from Rebuild Petaluma. Till then, take care.